Welcome to this presentation on suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. My name is Maureen Pollard. I'm a registered social worker working in Ontario in the area of traumatic bereavement, including suicide loss. As we get started, let's take a moment to think about your emotional safety. Talking and thinking about suicide is hard, and I invite you to take good care of yourself as you go through this process of learning. If you need to pause at any time, please do so. And plan a little bit of self-care for yourself tonight. Do something that you find soothing. If you need support by phone or text, you can reach out to the Crisis Service of Canada, and they will have their numbers on their website. Please consider your own experience of suicide as we get ready to talk about the theory and what can help. Perhaps you've experienced suicide loss, or suicide attempts, or thoughts of suicide. Maybe it's you, or maybe it's a family, friend, or acquaintance who's had these experiences. That will influence how you feel as you go through this learning process, and also it may influence how you feel when you are trying to support someone in suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. We think about statistics sometimes, and I want to emphasize that suicide is a public health problem. Today in Canada, there will probably be about 200 attempts and 11 completions. Each year, there are approximately 4,000 deaths by suicide, and each death by suicide leaves approximately 7 to 10 direct survivors. Males are 3 times more likely to die by suicide, often because they choose more lethal methods, although females are 3 times more likely to attempt suicide. Some of the factors that contribute to suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and suicide include genetic and biological factors. They're doing more research on some of the circumstances that can contribute to this situation. But we also know that there are life stressors, particularly suicide loss. If someone has experienced suicide loss, they become much more vulnerable to dying by suicide themselves. We also see the risk of suicide increase when someone loses a role or status that they have held, and in the aftermath of trauma or intergenerational trauma. Social issues including isolation and loneliness contribute to suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, and suicide deaths. And opportunity as well as access to the means by which to die are factors in suicide loss as well. When we're talking about suicide, I want us to remember that language matters. It's always best to be clear and direct, to use the word suicide when you're talking so that everybody understands what the question is, to say died by suicide or suicided, to say suicide attempt or suicide completion. Suicide is not a crime, and so we want to avoid language like committed suicide that implies that it is a crime. The keys to prevention include increasing awareness and reducing stigma around the concept of suicide. We know that housing, income, and food security are suicide prevention tools as well. Treatment, care, and support for mental health challenges is an important aspect of suicide prevention. Social support and community connections that help combat isolation and loneliness. And personal resilience factors as well as coping skills that we can develop in all people will help reduce suicide thoughts, suicide behavior, and suicide deaths as well. And so we're going to begin by learning the warning signs using the acronym IS-PATH-WARM. I, ideation or thinking about suicide. S, substance use, problems with drugs or alcohol. These are signs and symptoms that might indicate someone would be vulnerable to thinking about or dying by suicide. P, a sense of purposelessness, feeling like there's no reason for living. Anxiety, feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope. T, feeling trapped or like there is no way out of a difficult situation. H for hopelessness or helplessness, feeling like things will never get better. W for withdrawal, avoiding family, friends, or activities the person used to enjoy. A for feeling unreasonable anger. R, engaging in risky or reckless behavior that they would normally avoid. And M for a significant change in mood. Now, we often think of low mood or bad mood when we think of someone who's thinking about suicide. But if someone has been depressed and thinking about suicide and suddenly has a lift in mood, that's a warning sign as well. And this is because when someone has a lift in energy, they may have made a decision to die. They may have that energy because they see hope that their pain will end. And contrary to what we think when we see them in a good mood, thinking that things are getting better, that's maybe at the time of the most risk to them. And so I invite you to try to remember these warning signs. Is path warm? When we think about suicide as a spectrum, we would know that suicidal thoughts are actually quite common. Many people have passing ideation, such as, thinking about how hard it is to live, or they wish they were dead. And they don't necessarily go any further than that fleeting thought that crosses their mind. When situations such as the factors we talked about become more difficult, or the warning signs become more present, we start to see movement from ideation to being at high risk to attempt suicide. So this is when they have a plan and they have a timeline for when they're going to complete that plan. Then we have an actual attempt, followed by the risk of a completion. And in the spectrum, an attempt does not always result in completion. And so that's the order on the spectrum. And then we have suicide loss survivors. And people who are survivors of suicide loss, quite commonly, as we mentioned earlier, experience thoughts of suicide. We know that suicide doesn't end pain, it just transfers the person's pain to the survivors. And that's this experience of then survivors thinking about suicide because they're hoping to end their deep pain now as well. Some of the keys to providing support to someone who might be thinking about suicide include first listening to understand. Often when we're listening, we're trying to think of what our response will be. When we listen to understand, we are giving the person in front of us all of our attention. We are not trying to formulate responses or arguments. We're just listening and reflecting on what they're saying to us. We offer empathy and let them know that we hear how very hard it is, how much pain they're in. And once a person feels heard, once they feel that their pain has been acknowledged, then we start to look for possibility of hope, and we invite them to think about the possibility of hope with us. And we turn our focus to the future. What might be worth living for? When we jump too quickly to hope or focus on the future, the person won't be able to come with us. They won't feel heard and understood. And so that first step is really important, that listening to understand. You can use phrases like, I can understand that, or I imagine that must be, or I care for you, and I'm here for you. Or I'll try to help. And so how can we help? Well, we can learn the warning signs. We can notice the warning signs in a person in our circle, and we can clearly and directly ask them, are you thinking about suicide? If we ask them clearly and directly, are you thinking about suicide? It won't give them any ideas. They're either thinking about it already or they're not. And so if you ask them that question, you're opening the door to talk about it and letting them know you're a safe person who's willing to go there. If you ask them, are you thinking about doing anything stupid or something like that, then it's really a way of shutting down the conversation because it tells them that you're not really there with them. You're not really comfortable with the word suicide, never mind the topic of suicide. So practicing asking the question clearly and directly, are you thinking about suicide, can be helpful in terms of showing up for someone who's having these thoughts. And so when you ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? It's important to be prepared to listen patiently and without judgment. Acknowledge and accept their feelings, whatever their feelings are. Validate them, reassure them that you care about them and that they are not alone, even though they are in great pain. As you do this and they feel heard, you may hear them turn the conversation toward hope or reasons to live, and you can offer those invitations yourself, and you can notice if they mention something, for example, that they have coming up in the future that might be a reason to stick around. It's important when you're trying to help someone that you not make promises you can't keep. You have to take care of yourself too, and so there's sometimes only so much you can do for someone you're trying to help. So by being a good listener, by being able to sit with the person in their pain and talk about these real feelings, that's quite a lot actually that you're doing without making promises you can't keep. When we think about phases of suicide intervention, we want to begin with exploring whether suicide is an option, remembering to be clear and direct, right? That question, are you thinking about suicide? As we speak with the person about their feelings and thoughts and ideas, we want to understand their situation. And you can remember this by saying CPR. What is their current plan? Have they had a previous attempt? And what are the resources available in their life for help? And then you can act. If someone is thinking about suicide and they have a plan, you can collaborate with them on a specific safety plan that's focused on a limited time frame, asking them if they can agree to stay alive for a specific time frame. So let's begin by talking about exploring suicide. If someone says, yes, they're thinking about suicide, it's reasonable to ask them if they've thought about suicide before. If you don't know that question, that's an important piece of assessing their risk. If they say yes, ask them what kept them from attempting suicide when they thought about it before. There might be in there some clue about hope or a future focus that you might be able to move back to when they're ready. Ask them what has changed since they didn't attempt suicide previously. What's changed that they're thinking about it again now? And give them space to talk about it without judging anything that they're saying. Another good question is, have you ever attempted suicide? And if the answer is yes, ask them what happened to keep them alive and what's different now. This can give you some clues to how serious their thinking is, if they have made a different decision this time compared to last time. That tells you a little bit about the risk potentially as well. If they tell you that they have a plan, then it is time to begin to explore the plan. You ask, do you have a plan for suicide right now? If they say yes, ask them if they'd be willing to talk about it. Ask them when are they thinking of following through with the plan and whether they have access to the method that they're planning. And once you've had a bit of a chance to explore that with them, you're also able to assess the risk a little bit more clearly. And then you can invite them to make a safety plan with you. As we think about safety planning, we want to start exploring supports. We want to ask questions like, who do you live with? Who do you spend time with otherwise? Who do you talk to about work and school? Who do you have fun with? Who's been your biggest supporter? Who makes you feel good when you spend time with them? And we can also begin to explore the future. What are the plans you've made for today? What's on your calendar in the next week? Is there anything you've been looking forward to? You can ask questions that are more general, like what season do you enjoy most? Is anyone counting on you for something? And is there anything you would really like to have happen? These questions are going to help you learn a little bit more about this person and their life and how they're thinking and feeling. These future focuses and hope focuses are sometimes easily lost when a person is in deep pain, such deep pain that they're thinking about ending their life because the pain is too much to bear. And so when we ask some of these questions, it almost acts as a reminder to the person as well as a clue to us about what might be important and helpful in terms of turning their focus back to living. We want to explore internal and external resources, right? So we want to ask them, how have you handled problems like this in the past? What do you do that helps you feel better? Is there something you've always dreamed of doing? Remember again, who do you live with? Who do you see regularly? Who has helped you before? Does anyone in your life count on you for something? Or do you have a pet that counts on you? These are the kind of things that help remind people of the more positive aspects of their life. And sometimes these are hard to find. Some people have quite difficult situations. And so you're listening very closely for small glimmers of hope when the pain is very deep. It can be really important to acknowledge a person's ambivalence. And here are some ways that you can do that. You can ask them, you could say to them, part of you wants to die and part of you wants to live. You can say, you're thinking about killing yourself, but you're not sure about it. Or you're feeling like suicide is the answer, but you wish there was another solution. Or it seems like maybe you don't want to die, but you do want a way to end this really painful situation. When we're able to identify the ambivalence, acknowledge that deep pain and their thoughts, and just be calm and present with them in this conversation, it helps them to feel heard, and it also helps them to acknowledge this ambivalence themselves and to recognize that perhaps there is something holding them to life as well. So when we think about safety planning, there are some key points to remember. A good question is, what will you do to stay safe for now? It doesn't do much good to ask people to promise us that they will never die by suicide. And when someone's in great pain and thinking about suicide, it's really more helpful to ask them, what can they do right now in this moment? Ask them what they'll do if they're thinking about suicide in the next so many hours. Keep it to a number under 72 hours. 72 hours is about as long as you want to make a safety plan for, because that can feel really long when you're in deep pain. Ask them who they could call if they think they might attempt suicide, and help them make an actual list of names and numbers. Maybe you help them add those numbers to their contact list in their phone or on their computer. Maybe you make a paper copy of the names and numbers that they can carry in their pocket. But write them down. Remind them that these people are present, available, and might help them. And then, in part of your safety planning, review reasons that the person has identified to turn toward life and hope. So, in all of the listening that you've been doing that leads up to the ability to collaborate on a safety plan with the person, you've been listening for the things they have to live for. It might be a connection with a person in their life or a pet that relies on them. It might be something that they're hoping will happen next week, next month, or next year. But you're going to revisit those ideas that they have identified and invite them to make that list as well. And invite them to think about some of those more positive things if they can just hold on until this pain passes. When we think about safety planning, it's really important to focus on the person's ideas and choices. And so being non-directive is a really an asset in this process. Being collaborative, where you can talk over ideas and help them develop an action plan. You're sharing information, ideas, and resources with them, but you're ultimately giving them the choice. And when we give them the choice, by offering them options and informations that they might be in too much pain to think about just now, we are empowering them. And so your safety plan might look something like this. Okay, I can agree not to harm myself in any way for the next X number of hours. If I am thinking about suicide, I will do something to take care of myself, and I will call so-and-so at this number, or I will call or text the crisis line. Again, those numbers are available at Crisis Services Canada on their website. If you can, have them put it in writing can help them make a commitment to the safety plan. But if they can't, then a verbal agreement is important too. So what you can do when someone that you know or someone that you are spending time with is thinking of suicide, you can offer kindness and your compassionate presence. You can also potentially offer practical assistance. Is there some kind of hands-on help that they need for a task that you could help them with? Maybe walking the dog, cleaning the kitchen. It's important to get their permission before you do some of these things, but that can really help a person feel cared for and hopeful. Are there resources in your community that you know about or can help them find when they're really struggling to find these things themselves? It's important to think about whether you can be prepared to be in this for the long haul with them. If you are going to try to help a person over the long haul, it's important to be available but not intrusive. You can't control what they say or do. You're not there to fix things for them. You're only available to support them. It's so important to stay patient because people can struggle with pain and suicide thoughts and even attempts for a very long time in the process of trying to heal what is causing their pain. If you're going to be in it for the long haul, ask them how they're doing. Ask them if they're okay. And when you do that, be prepared for whatever their real answer is. Remembering that you don't have to fix things for them. They just want to feel heard. And that actually gives people quite a bit of relief sometimes, all on its own. So remember, you want to explore a person's feelings, asking them questions to get to know them and understand their situation better. Let them talk. Take some time with this and remember that as long as they're talking to you, they are not dying. So you have time. Time to get to know them, time to validate their feelings and reassure them. Reflect their feelings back to them. You can use phrases like, it seems like, or sounds as if you feel, and then reflect back what you think you're hearing. They'll correct you if you haven't got it quite right. Or if you are getting right on the money, they will be so grateful to feel heard. Ask them if they're thinking about suicide, if they have a plan. Don't spend too much time on a plan if it's not imminent. If they say yes, they're thinking about suicide, but they haven't thought of a plan or a method or means, then don't spend much time there. Just go back to talking about what's got them in such pain, what are all their circumstances, what do they need to feel heard about, and all that while you're listening for those little signs of hope or future focus. And as you're listening for that hope, thinking about what's potentially good now and in their future, then you can invite them as they give you those snippets. You can give them back to them in reflection. You can say, it sounds like it's very painful right now because you're facing this problem, but it also sounds like you have this other thing to look forward to. And you're kind of hoping that you can get there, but it feels like it's almost impossible to get there right now because you're in so much pain. All right, so you can see how you are validating, reassuring, and inviting them to think about the possibility of staying, of living. Some of the pitfalls to avoid when you're trying to help someone include asking why. When we ask people the question why, it can make them feel defensive, right? Why are you thinking about that? Why would you do that? Right? That's going to make people feel defensive and close down. It's also important to remember that you're really not there to share your own opinions. What a person in pain needs is to have you listen to understand them and their perspective. They want to feel heard so that they're not feeling as alone and they're feeling like there's some relief for them. It's also easy to get stuck on problem-focused talk. And so when we think about the kind of conversation you're having with them, we want to let them talk about all their problems, but we also want to pick up on any potential positive that they mention so that we don't just get stuck in the problem, but we're also listening for that hope and possibility. Try to avoid offering advice, directions, or fixes. There isn't anything you can do that is going to fix their situations or their feelings about them. And so instead of trying to fix it, focus on what their choices are, give them information, suggestions, and resources, always leaving it up to them to make the choice about what they do or don't do. And don't try to give them a reason to live. Your reasons for living might be quite different than their reasons for living. And so you're going to engage them by asking questions that help them come to their own reasons for living. If the risk is imminent and they will not agree to a safety plan, you may decide to call 911. It's important to know that this can involve a police response as well as ambulance or fire, and that this can be triggering in certain situations for people. However, if the risk is imminent, calling 911 will help ensure that they get transported to the hospital. At the hospital, the primary things that will happen is that there will be an assessment of the immediate risk of harm. And if there is an imminent risk of harm and they're refusing to make a safety plan at the hospital too, then they will be admitted and supervised to help reduce the immediate risk. This hospitalization process can be done voluntarily if someone agrees to enter the hospital, or it can be done involuntarily if they are at imminent risk of harm to themselves by a Form 1, which is signed by a doctor, a Form 2, which is signed by a Justice of the Peace, and lasts for 72 hours. Again, we know that if we can get people to hold on, their thoughts and feelings about suicide may pass, that they may shift, and they may well shift back into those thoughts and feelings again, but they also shift out of them. Sometimes if we can keep a person alive for that 72 hours, something will shift in their thinking for another period of time. So I want to spend just a moment speaking about the idea of helping family and friends who are worried about someone else who's thinking about suicide. You can share the information you've learned with them about how to help. You can ask them questions like, what has them worried the person is thinking about suicide? Do they know the warning signs? Is path warm? Does the person they're worried about have access to weapons or the means to die? Can this person that's worried help make a safety plan with the person who's at risk? Does the person who's worried have a support network available to them outside of their conversation with you? These are some of the questions that can help you know what the person is in need of, and you can help connect them to resources. Maybe that's a professional, maybe that is supporting them in connecting with another family member or a friend. That can be a network that's going to help them through this time as they worry about someone else who's thinking about suicide. A word as well about helping survivors of suicide loss. Grief after suicide loss often includes shock, disbelief, and denial, wanting to know why this would happen. How could the person do this? Feelings of guilt, shame, regret, and anger. Sometimes, if the struggle has been going on for a very long time with the person who died, there can be a feeling of resignation or a sense of relief because it's been very hard to live on the edge, not knowing if the person was going to live or die for so long. There is a stigma attached to suicide loss that can leave survivors feeling isolated and lonely. People do not want to talk about or hear about suicide loss, and so it becomes a part of the process of leaving someone at risk of harm to themselves because they're experiencing a trauma response that may become post-traumatic stress disorder and may lead to the survivor having thoughts of suicide themselves. So when we think about suicide loss work, when we are doing prevention work, when we're doing intervention work, we're also doing grief work. And grief work with survivors of suicide loss is also prevention and intervention. A word about resilience. Resilience is defined by the American Psychological Association as the ability to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, and stress. And so we know that people experience adversity, trauma, and stress, and no one really escapes it. And so what we're looking at is how can we help people adapt when this happens? There are several personal resilience factors, and these are important for you as a helper. And they're also factors that you can introduce to the people you're trying to help who might be thinking about suicide or grieving a suicide loss. Some strategies for how to cope with thoughts, feelings, and problems can help us feel more resilient. The ability to have realistic optimism and perspective about what's happening to and around us is helpful. The ability to find a way to accept change can help us be more resilient. Strategies for self-care can build our resilience and help us feel well or return to feeling well. Thankfulness or gratitude can help us notice those things that are positive in life. Connection and support to people who are understanding and caring and compassionate. Resilience is also helped by having a sense of humor. And sometimes when people are in quite a bit of pain or they've experienced something quite horrific, that humor might be a bit morbid, and that's normal. And so being able to accept that is helpful in some of these situations. Having effective boundaries, being able to say no when you need to take care of yourself. So saying no to someone else might mean saying yes to yourself, and that can be really important but hard to do. Making SMART goals, which really means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-oriented. And so SMART goals help us break down our ultimate goals into small steps that feel like we can achieve them. And as we achieve them, we gain confidence and build our competence to do more and bigger steps. And then having a sense of control. There are so many things that are out of our control in this world. The times that we are able and encouraged to gather information and then make choices for ourselves is empowering and helps us feel more resilient. Shinzen Young talks about suffering as pain times resistance, saying that pain comes from dealing with something that is difficult, and suffering comes from getting locked in negative thoughts. And so the antidote is compassion. When we have compassion for ourselves and for others, it helps us relieve suffering. I invite you to think about this strategy when things are difficult, when your mind is racing or you're experiencing pain, and you can share this strategy with people when you're trying to help them. Stop what you're doing. Take a few deep breaths. Observe what's happening in your mind or body. What are you thinking and feeling? What's your reaction to this situation that you must deal with in front of you? And once you've done that, then you can proceed intentionally and with compassion for yourself and a person who's working with you or who you're trying to help. Thinking about gratitude, I invite you to consider ending each day trying to think about 3 good things that happened in the day. Even on our darkest days, there may be a way to find some spark, something that feels positive or hopeful or that we're grateful for. Even when we're in deep pain, we can be grateful for some small things. Maybe that's the presence of a pet or someone who loves us, or the fact that the sun was shining, something like that. When we turn our mind to the good things, it can feel hard at first if we're not used to doing it. Our brains get really good at noticing negatives because our brains are trying to protect us from danger and negative things. And so when we practice gratitude this way, then what we're doing is actually retraining our brain to have more balance, right? And similarly, you can think about the 52 card thank you challenge. In 2021, I was having a hard time kind of staying focused and feeling balanced and struggling a bit with my mood. And so I decided that I was going to spend a little bit of time each week thinking about someone I was grateful for and write them a thank you note. And so I did. In 2021, I wrote 52 thank you notes to people in my life, people I know well, people I've known for a long time, people I've known for just a little while or don't know well at all. And we don't always need to do 52 thank you cards to feel better, but sometimes turning our attention to gratitude in this way and giving a note to someone else lifts us, and then it also lifts the spirit of the person receiving the thank you note. When we think about caring for ourselves, it's also important to rest. And so Amanda Rocheleau talks about the idea of passive rest, where, she calls it two-handed tea. And so, how many times do we have a hot drink that we take a few sips of and then we get distracted, and when we come back, it's cold? So the invitation in passive rest is to sit with both hands on your mug or your cup, holding it and feeling the warmth in your hands, inhaling the scent, feeling the warmth as it goes over your lips and into your body, and just being present for that restful few moments that it takes to drink that tea or other hot beverage that you enjoy. Similarly, she talked about active rest as being important, and so she called it cruise control. This is an activity that is distracting from your problems or your pain, and it is something that can help you have a break from it, but keep your attention. right? And so we think about, watching movies or videos or, YouTube clips. We think about video games. We can think about jigsaw puzzles, anything like that, where we've got a bit of engagement happening, but it's on something different than what we've been worrying about or feeling pain over. I also invite you to think about breathing exercises. Intentional breathing helps activate the calming center of our nervous system. And so when we breathe intentionally, taking a nice deep breath and exhaling slowly, we are able to counteract the distress that we feel. So if you get comfortable and you notice your own breath for a few moments, you may notice that when you're under stress, you only breathe into the top part of your lungs. And a nice deep breath fills your full lungs and also pushes your belly up as your diaphragm comes down as your lungs expand. So you can say something to yourself as you inhale and exhale, such as breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I calm my mind. Or inhaling comfort, exhaling pain. Any words that work for you can help draw your attention to your breath and pause those racing thoughts that we sometimes fall into. Similarly, you can count your inhale and exhale, and I'll teach you the 4-7-8 breathing exercise, which can be quite useful in this way. You inhale for a count of 4, you hold your breath for a count of 7, and then you exhale for a count of 8. And when we do that, we're activating that calming center of our nervous system, we're pausing our racing thoughts, and we're making sure that our bodies get enough oxygenated blood so they're not feeling as tense. Our muscles and brain function better when there's enough oxygenated blood in them. So I invite you to sit comfortably and to just breathe as I count. We're going to do 3 breaths in the 4-7-8 pattern. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last one. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so if you find that you don't like holding for the 7, it works just as well if you inhale for a count of 4 and then exhale for a count of 8. That long inhale helps make sure you get lots of oxygenated blood, and that slow exhale helps activate the calming center of your nervous system. And so I invite you, as you think about supporting someone who is thinking about suicide, or who has attempted suicide, or who is a survivor of suicide loss, I invite you to shine your light in the world and to pause for a moment. You can make yourself comfortable as I read this meditation. You can look at the image on the screen, you can close your eyes, or you can gaze at whatever is comfortable for you in your space. Remember, you are one person, doing the best you can in difficult circumstances. Like other times of great upheaval, this too will pass. Take a deep breath. Learn, rest, try again. That is all you can do, and it is enough. You will move through this in your own way and at your own pace. You are already adapting. Inhale calm. Allow a feeling of peace. Exhale stress. Let it all go. You have everything you need within you to feel and to heal, so you can continue to shine your light for yourself and for the world, one breath at a time. I thank you for attending for this presentation. I thank you for caring about people who might be thinking about suicide or who are survivors of suicide loss and learning how to help them with compassion and presence. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. And as you move into the world, please take good care of yourself. Thank you.